Did you know that in a single instant, an anonymous bullet can erase an entire life? This was the brutal reality at the Plaszow concentration camp, where Amon Göth, the hunter who turned prisoners into sniper targets, spread terror throughout the years of the Second World War. In this video, we will witness the portrait of the man known as the Butcher of Płaszów. From his villa balcony to the gallows in a public execution, revealing his twisted acts and the moment of justice that ended it all. Prepare yourself for chilling footage, shocking testimonies, and lessons on the power of conscience amidst the darkness of atrocity. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss these dramatic historical stories, and keep watching to learn more about Amon Göth's crimes and the justice that captured him. First, let us lift the veil of time and return to the year 1939. When the Second World War erupted across Europe and the world was engulfed in smoke and fire. The Second World War, which lasted from 1939 to 1945, was the largest global military conflict in human history. Every major power of the era participated, divided into two main factions: the Allies, comprising the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, the French Republic, China, and many others, and the Axis powers, which included Nazi Germany, the Kingdom of Italy, and the Empire of Japan. The war began when Nazi Germany, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland on the 1st of September, 1939, prompting Britain and France to declare war. The conflict quickly spread throughout Europe and North Africa, then into the Asia-Pacific region after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The result was tens of millions of military and civilian casualties, along with the Holocaust, the genocide targeting Jews, and numerous other minority groups. By May 1945, the Allies had defeated Germany, and in August 1945, Japan surrendered following the dropping of 2 atomic bombs, officially ending the war. In the aftermath, the United Nations was founded. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union erupted, and a wave of decolonization swept across the globe. Amidst this tragedy, Amon Göth emerged as the cruelest symbol in Europe. Born in Vienna in 1908, he joined the SS at an early age and absorbed the ideology of racial supremacy. In 1943, Göth was appointed commandant of the Płaszów concentration camp, a facility formerly a cement factory near Kraków. From the balcony of his villa, bordering the barbed wire fence, he held a rifle, silently sweeping the vast campgrounds and selecting targets like a hunter in a crowded field. The unfortunate prisoners never knew when the bullet would come. They only felt death arrive silently and abruptly, like a thunderclap in clear skies. Each pull of the trigger marked an unannounced massacre, leaving the camp in eerie silence. The wind whistling through cold concrete and the clatter of straw-laden carts formed a macabre accompaniment to the horrifying melody of life and death. The sniper's act ceased to be a military duty and became a ruthless display of power, engraving terror into every moment of survival. With a cold gaze and a precise bullet, Göth defied all humanitarian values, instilling an indelible dread in anyone who survived the camp. This is the beginning of the story of a man and crimes beyond forgiveness amid the darkness of war. Born in the year 1908 in Vienna, Amon Göth grew up amid the political chaos following the First World War, where extremist nationalism and supremacist ideology spread across Europe. From his youth, he was drawn to the dark nationalist ideals of the Nazi Party. At the age of 18, Göth joined the Hitler Youth, and just a few years later, while still in his 20s, he officially became a member of the SS, the elite force responsible for carrying out genocidal policies and political repression. His skill with weapons, combat prowess, and boundless cruelty quickly propelled Göth's rapid advancement, surpassing many of his contemporaries by the year 1943. As the Second World War intensified on the Eastern Front, Göth was appointed Commandant of the Płaszów concentration camp, a former cement factory facility located adjacent to the railway near Kraków. From his very first days in office, he transformed the camp into a stage of brutality. Prisoners, mostly Jews and political detainees, were forced to assemble each morning to witness regularly scheduled executions. They could neither refuse nor were they given explanations. Each execution felt like a ritual of terror, intended to instill deep, unrelenting fear in the minds of the survivors. These parades of death typically began with the whistle of guards and the hurried footsteps of sentries, ending with the echo of gunfire and the clatter of bodies falling. On one occasion, a prisoner was summoned and shot on the way to forced labor simply because he glanced sideways. On another, a man was killed for moving slightly too briskly. This habit of senseless killing earned Göth the nickname Butcher of Płaszów, a title spoken by both comrades and captives with equal parts loathing and horror. Göth's brutality did not remain confined to SS archives. When the film Schindler's List premiered in the year 1993, director Steven Spielberg cast Ralph Fiennes as the SS lieutenant, vividly recreating Göth's terrifying persona through Fiennes's cold gaze and nonchalant gestures in the face of others' suffering. The actor brought to life the unimaginable evil of the Płaszów commandant. As a result, modern audiences could better grasp the atrocities and cruelty Göth unleashed, while also learning the lasting lesson of the ultimate punishment that awaited him after the war's end. Since then, the moniker Butcher of Płaszów has stood not only as a warning of fascist brutality, but also as evidence of inhumanity when power is wielded without restraint. More horrifying than the sniper's bullet was Göth's twisted personal pastime each morning. He placed his rifle's telescopic sight beside his plate of fried eggs so he could casually pick off prisoners as he ate. This banal act, eating breakfast while selecting human targets, typified his perverse blend of routine domesticity and murderous caprice. He treated the campgrounds as his private shooting range, where every inmate's life was forfeit at the whim of a man who delighted in power unopposed. Göth did not stop at firearms. He trained a pack of ravenous hunting dogs to savage defenseless prisoners on command, deriving sadistic pleasure from their anguished cries as they were torn apart. Witnesses later testified to scenes of utter terror. A guard's whistle pierced the early morning chill. The dogs lunged, and the camp's inmates watched in paralyzed horror as their comrades were mauled. The sight of a man's limbs flailing, blood spraying through the cold air, became grotesquely routine under Göth's rule. Public hangings added another layer to his spectacle of cruelty. On designated days, groups of Jewish laborers were assembled in the square and forced to stand on wooden platforms. Guards bound ropes around their necks, and the bodies were hoisted until the prisoners asphyxiated, limbs flailing helplessly as they attempted to breathe. These executions were carried out for the slightest provocation, an accidental glance, a whispered word. Even the rumor that one man had slipped past the perimeter in one notorious incident, when a single prisoner escaped, Göth ordered the summary execution of more than a dozen men from the same work detail. They were marched into an empty trench, shot, and their bodies left to dangle as a grim deterrent. Such collective punishment became a hallmark of his reign of terror, a methodical tool to crush any flicker of resistance. Every arrival of Göth's car triggered an almost audible hush. The squeak of its iron wheels on the gravel road, the crisp click of the door, and his indifferent stride undercut any semblance of normality. At the sight of his uniformed figure, prisoners froze in place, hearts pounding in their chests as if expecting the end. Even the wind seemed to still. The camp's daily rhythm suspended under the specter of impending violence. This oppressive atmosphere was no accident but a deliberate tactic. By maintaining constant threat, Göth ensured that fear itself became an instrument of control. The systematic nature of this brutality was both incredible and chilling. It was not random violence, but a carefully orchestrated program of terror designed to strip prisoners of hope and humanity. Every aspect of camp life, work detail, roll call, meals. Rest was punctuated by Göth's arbitrary displays of force. His behavior reflected an ideology that dehumanized its victims, reducing them to mere targets in an elaborate game. Under Göth's command, Płaszów ceased to be a detention center and became a theater of sadism, where cruelty was both state policy and personal indulgence. In this relentless environment, the line between order and anarchy dissolved, leaving only fear in its wake. As the tides of the Second World War finally turned against the Third Reich, the protective veil that had shrouded Nazi violence began to unravel. In the month of May 1945, Allied forces pressed through Central Europe, and near the border between Austria and Poland, American soldiers apprehended Amon Göth, initially held as a prisoner of war. Göth might have slipped into obscurity, another uniformed figure detained by circumstance. However, the unearthing of SS personnel records and the testimonies of liberated survivors left no doubt about his identity. The butcher of Płaszów stood exposed. Once forced to confront the mounting evidence, Göth was swiftly extradited to Poland for trial. In the month of August 1946, he appeared before the Supreme National Tribunal in Kraków, a courtroom heavy with the weight of history. Prosecutors laid out an array of charges: the mass murder of innocent civilians, systematic torture, and crimes against humanity on a scale that defied comprehension. Seated at the defense table, Göth wore the same steely expression he had displayed on his villa balcony. As if daring the court to condemn him, the tribunal heard horrifying eyewitness accounts day after day. Survivors described families dragged from their homes and executed without even a pretense of due process. They spoke of trenches filled with corpses until there was no room left, of forced laborers collapsing from starvation, only to be shot for the crime of weakness. Voices trembled as witnesses recounted scenes of children frozen with fear, of ovens stoked not for warmth, but to consume the remains of those who had vanished. Against this litany of suffering, any claim that Göth had merely followed orders evaporated like mist in the morning sun. The Nazi defense doctrine that obedience to superior commands exonerated personal culpability crumbled under the weight of such unassailable testimony. Throughout the proceedings, the tribunal deliberated not only the facts of individual cases, but also the broader moral betrayal. A man entrusted with authority had weaponized it to orchestrate horror. As the final verdict loomed, The courtroom held its collective breath, knowing that the decision would echo far beyond Krakow's walls. When the judges pronounced Göth guilty on every count, it marked more than the fall of one perpetrator. It signaled the world's refusal to tolerate such inhumanity ever again. In that moment, the instruments of justice, sharpened on the whetstone of atrocity, struck with clarity. No ideology, no rank, no superior order could shield a criminal of such monstrous deeds from accountability. On the 5th of September, 1946, the tribunal delivered its sentence. Amon Göth would face death by hanging. This verdict served not only as retribution for his unspeakable atrocities, but also as a clear message to the world: justice had prevailed. The date was set for Friday, the 13th of September, and the scene was laid out in the prison yard of Montelupik, Krakow's central detention facility. A gallows was erected in full view of the assembled guards, officials, and a handful of witnesses, an uncommon occurrence in post-war Europe. As dawn broke on that fateful morning, a tense hush fell over the compound. Göth, clad in his prison uniform, was brought forth under heavy guard. His bearing was defiant. He refused to bend his head or show remorse. When the presiding officer offered him an opportunity for final words, Göth seized the moment to shout, "Heil Hitler," a chilling testament to his enduring fanaticism. Even as the regime he idolized crumbled around him, his cry echoed off the stone walls, a stark reminder that the ideology of hate he embodied was not so easily silenced. The first attempt at hanging went awry when the noose proved too long. Göth dropped clean through the trapdoor, but his neck did not break, leaving him dangling painfully at full body weight. Prison medical staff hurried to revive him for a second attempt. Observers reported a strangled gasp, then an eerie stillness. As the first execution ended in failure, a murmur rippled through the onlookers. Justice had been delayed, but not denied. On the second try, the noose was adjusted. Yet again, it failed to achieve its grim purpose. Göth's body fell, his feet brushing the wood of the scaffold, his neck resisting the fatal force. For a moment, the air seemed to hold its breath, as if nature itself recoiled from prolonging such suffering. Prisoners and guards alike watched in grim fascination, caught between revulsion and relief that the burden of responsibility was shared by the mechanical complication of the gallows. Finally, on the third attempt, the rope was hastily shortened. As the trapdoor lurched open, Göth dropped, and at last, his neck snapped with a sickening crack. His body swung lifeless beneath the gallows beam. In that moment, the abstract idea of justice was rendered concrete and visceral. A man who had wielded death with casual cruelty now experienced its full weight. Witnesses later described feeling a mixture of emotional release and solemn acknowledgement that a chapter of horror had closed. The public nature of the execution ensured that Göth's downfall would not be whispered in secret. It would stand as a testament to the rule of law over tyranny. It was a rare victory, deeply symbolic, proving that even the most monstrous perpetrators could be held to account. In the silence that followed, the gallows stood as an unspoken pledge humanity would remember, and it would never again allow such cruelty to go unpunished. The trial of Amon Göth commenced in August of 1946 at the Supreme National Tribunal in Krakow, a courtroom heavy with the weight of history. As the accused entered the dock, he faced a litany of charges: genocide, mass murder, torture, and crimes against humanity. His defense counsel invoked the familiar plea of superior orders that Göth had merely followed instructions from higher authority, yet this legal shield proved brittle when confronted with the overwhelming body of evidence. Prosecutors presented meticulously kept SS personnel files detailing Göth's rapid promotions and explicit directives to carry out executions. Medical logs from Płaszów documented the volumes of ammunition expended, the frequency of shootings, and the number of bodies exhumed and subsequently burned in attempts to conceal evidence. Perhaps most damning were the testimonies of survivors, delivered with voices trembling, yet resolute. These witnesses, former inmates who had endured unspeakable horrors, recounted scenes of private pyres where Göth ordered trenches dug for mass burials before igniting corpses to erase their existence. They described families marched into pits, shot at close range, their bodies heaped like refuse, only to be set aflame under his watchful command. Black and white photographs, unearthed by Allied investigators, provided stark, silent corroboration. Images showed skeletal figures kneeling in rows, backs to the camera, hands bound, as SS guards raised rifles to execute them. Others captured the charred remains of makeshift crematoria, columns of smoke still visible in the frame. These haunting visuals, presented slide by slide, left the courtroom in collective silence, concrete proof that Płaszów had become more than a detention facility. It was a theater of systematic atrocity. Each day of the trial saw the gallery filled to capacity. Journalists, foreign dignitaries, and even former SS officers squeezed into wooden benches, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. The air was thick, not only with the oppressive heat of late summer, but with the moral gravity of the proceedings. With every survivor's account, with each photograph displayed, the notion that Göth was merely a cog in the Nazi machine disintegrated. His defense's argument that obedience to orders absolved him crumbled under the weight of first-hand witness accounts and documentary evidence showing that Göth had acted with murderous zeal far beyond any standard military directive. As the tribunal convened day after day, it became clear that this trial was not only about one man's fate. It was a reckoning with the darkest aspects of human nature and a demand that even the most powerful perpetrators be held accountable. In that courtroom, amid the echo of solemn testimonies and the glare of photographic evidence, justice asserted itself with unflinching clarity. No plea of duty could excuse the systematic extermination and torture that had stained Göth's command with indelible bloodshed. After days of intense hearings, on the 5th of September, 1946, the tribunal delivered its verdict. Amon Göth was to be executed by hanging. This sentence represented more than mere personal retribution. It stood as a powerful declaration of justice on behalf of the millions who had perished in the Holocaust. Prosecutors had followed what observers called the first shot of truth strategy, deploying unassailable evidence to reveal the full, brutal consequences of Nazi ideology. When the judges read their decision, a hush descended over the courtroom. Survivors, many of whom had endured unimaginable suffering under Göth's command, wept openly. Some bowed their heads in solemn reflection, while others allowed themselves rare expressions of relief. Yet amid these tears, Amon Göth himself remained defiantly unbowed. As the sentence was pronounced, he turned his head toward the judges and bellowed Heil Hitler, a chilling reaffirmation of his fanatic loyalty. Even in the face of ultimate condemnation, that moment crystallized the profound clash between evil and accountability. For the survivors, it signified the world's recognition of their pain and loss. For the broader public, it signaled that no architect of genocide could elude the reach of justice. Newspapers across Europe and North America splashed headlines proclaiming the fall of the butcher of Plaszow, and radio broadcasts detailed the tribunal's meticulous findings in coffeehouses from London to New York. People debated the implications. Could legal proceedings ever truly reckon with crimes on such a massive scale? Yet in Kraków, the answer had been emphatic. Göth's unrepentant salute only underscored the necessity of his punishment. His final act of allegiance to a collapsing regime underscored the ideological depths from which his cruelty sprang. Observers described the courtroom scene as eerily theatrical. Göth, once a man of unquestioned power, now isolated and bound by chains, uttering the rallying cry of a discredited tyranny. The contrast between his former authority and his present vulnerability crystallized the tribunal's message. The rule of law, not terror, would prevail. As Göth was led away, survivors whispered prayers of thanks that their stories had not gone unheard. The tribunal's decision resonated far beyond the walls of the Krakow courthouse, inspiring other war crimes, trials, and reinforcing the principle that genocide is not an abstract atrocity, but a crime punishable under human law. In the annals of 20th century history, the 9th of September, 1946, stands as a testament to humanity's capacity to confront its darkest impulses and insist upon justice even when the wounds are still raw and the losses uncountable. In that verdict, the world affirmed that no one, regardless of rank or ideology, is above the law. On Friday, the 13th of September, 1946, Montelupik prison in Kraków transformed its courtyard into a stage for a public execution, an event unprecedented in modern Polish history. At dawn, the gallows were erected in the center of the yard, flanked by barbed wire fences and a perimeter of armed guards. Polish officials and foreign diplomats watched from designated viewing areas, while international reporters and representatives of the newly formed United Nations documented every detail. Word had spread across Europe that this execution would be a demonstration not only of punishment, but of international resolve against genocide. As the hour approached, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. Prisoners and staff alike clustered behind fences, their faces etched with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The crisp morning air carried the distant clang of cell doors shutting and the rustle of guard uniforms. At precisely 9 o'clock, Amon Göth was led into the courtyard, clad in a drab gray-blue prison uniform. He appeared gaunt, his shoulders hunched. The defiance that had marked his command at Płaszów had ragged edges now, replaced by a hollow stillness. His eyes darted across the sea of witnesses, yet in that moment, the aura of unchecked power that once surrounded him evaporated. Göth climbed the wooden steps to the scaffold as the executioner checked the noose. A photographer's flash momentarily illuminated his ashen features. Around him, the world seemed to hold its breath. The clip-clop of a guard's boots, the distant chirp of a stray bird, and the faint echo of wind slicing through the iron bars. For a man who had orchestrated mass murder with calculated cruelty, this was his final performance, stripped of authority, exposed to public scrutiny. The prison chaplain offered last rites, and Göth gave no sign of repentance. When asked for final words, he mustered a hollow cry of Heil Hitler, a fanatical echo that reverberated awkwardly in the silent morning. That final declaration of loyalty to a regime already defeated underscored the ideological chasm between his contempt for humanity and the values the world now sought to uphold. As the trapdoor was tested one last time, the mechanical clang snapped the tension like a starting gun. Göth stepped forward. The floor gave way, and he dropped, but the rope was miscalculated, and too long his body swung without achieving the intended lethal force. Guards rushed to adjust the noose and revive him for a second attempt. The crowd watched, some shifting uneasily, recognizing the grim reality that justice could be as brutal as the crimes it punished. On the second try, after precise adjustments, the execution succeeded. Göth's neck broke with a sickening crack, and his body swung limply in the morning light. A collective exhale swept through the spectators, a release of the grief and rage the world had carried since the war's darkest days. In that courtyard, justice was rendered tangible, not hidden behind walls or lost in bureaucratic forms, but performed in plain view. The public execution of Amon Göth became more than an end to one man's tyranny. It stood as an unequivocal statement that the world would no longer tolerate the systematic obliteration of human dignity. The first attempt at hanging Göth ended in grim farce when the executioner misjudged the length of the rope. As the trapdoor sprung open, Göth fell the full distance, but his neck did not snap. Instead, his body thudded against the wooden platform with a sickening thud, then dangled limply without the fatal break. Silence gripped the assembled witnesses like a vice. Guards and spectators alike stared in stunned disbelief, their shock hanging in the air thicker than the morning mist. An involuntary gasp rippled through the crowd as they realized that even the machinery of justice could falter. Prison medical staff immediately rushed to revive Göth, hauling him back onto the scaffold by the shoulders. His limbs twitched, but he remained conscious, his eyes wild with indignation and pain. He attempted to pull free, straining against the noose with surprising strength, as though fighting to cling to the last vestiges of his power. Yet it was the unyielding grip of the legal system embodied in the cold steel of those shackles and the implacable framework of the gallows that held him fast. Slowly, the executioner adjusted the rope's length, pulling the coils taut to ensure the next drop would deliver its deadly purpose. A hushed murmur passed among the onlookers as preparations for the second attempt began. Some shifted uncomfortably, glancing away from the scaffold, unwilling to witness further indignity. Yet most remained transfixed, recognizing that the stakes transcended Göth's personal fate. This was the world's reckoning moment, a public affirmation that no bureaucratic error could undermine the principle of accountability. The wind sighed through the bars, as if urging the process onward. When Göth stepped once more onto the trapdoor, his legs wobbled under the weight of anticipation. The executioner secured the adjusted noose and signaled readiness. With a swift motion, the lever was pulled again. Göth plunged downward, but again, the rope failed to break his neck. Instead, his feet scraped the platform's edge, and his body convulsed in suspended agony. The crowd stiffened, hearts pounding, caught between revulsion and the grim satisfaction that justice persisted beyond mere technicality. At last, for the third attempt, the noose was meticulously shortened. The executioner checked every knot, and silence fell so complete, it felt sacred. When Göth's boots touched the trapdoor this time, there was no hesitation. The lever dropped, and Göth dropped with it this time. His neck snapped instantly, and his body swung into stillness. A collective shudder ran through those gathered, not from the sound of gunfire, but from the stark realization that a man who had wielded terror now lay powerless. The tension dissolved into a visceral release. In that moment, the machinery of law had asserted its ultimate authority, transforming abstract justice into a brutal, unwavering reality. After the execution, Amon Göth's body was taken to the prison morgue and then cremated without ceremony. His ashes were scattered into the Vistula River, leaving behind no grave marker or memorial. This unceremonious end befits a man who once presumed to hold the lives of others in his hands, yet, despite the absence of stone or epitaph, Göth's legacy persisted in the collective memory of his victims and the haunting testimonies of survivors. Their recollections, etched with trauma and loss, became the living memorial to the horrors they endured. The decision to forego a burial site was deliberate. Polish authorities sought to prevent Göth's final resting place from becoming a shrine to extremist ideology. Instead, his physical remains were consigned to flowing water, a symbolic gesture that humanity would not allow him permanence even in death. Yet this act of erasure did not diminish the weight of his crimes. Rather, it underscored that his true monument would be the cautionary tale his life embodied. Decades later, in 1993, Steven Spielberg's film Schindler's List brought Göth's atrocities back into stark relief. Ralph Fiennes's portrayal captured the commandant's cold sadism and chilling detachment, offering modern audiences a visceral window into the cruelty that transpired at Płaszów. Through the film's black and white cinematography and unflinching depiction of violence, viewers worldwide could grasp how absolute power, unchecked by conscience, can descend into pure atrocity. Schindler's List did more than entertain. It educated generations on the imperative of moral vigilance. Göth's story transcends mere biography. It serves as a historical lesson on the perils of dehumanization and blind obedience. His trajectory from an SS officer enamored with racial supremacy to a condemned war criminal illustrates how ordinary institutions and individuals can be co-opted into systems of oppression. When society tolerates incremental abuses, when the warning signs of cruelty are dismissed as routine discipline or military necessity, the descent into genocide becomes possible today. Scholars and educators cite Göth's example to emphasize the responsibility of each person to resist injustice. Memorials at former concentration camps, classroom curricula, and survivor memoirs all invoke his name as a reminder that atrocities are neither abstract nor inevitable. They remind us that every human life carries inherent dignity, and that surrendering to hatred and fear can have catastrophic consequences. In the end, the absence of a tomb for Amon Göth does not signify his erasure. Rather, the river that carried his ashes continues to flow past the very land where his cruelty unfolded, whispering a warning through the ages. As long as humanity forgets the lessons of the past, darkness remains poised to repeat itself. Amon Göth's tragic legacy did not end with his death. His chilling persona was cemented in the global consciousness when director Steven Spielberg cast Ralph Fiennes as the SS lieutenant in Schindler's List. Fiennes' portrayal, his icy stare, measured cruelty, and casual violence etched an indelible image of the Holocaust's brutality into the minds of audiences worldwide. For many former inmates, seeing those scenes on screen triggered tears and overwhelming emotions, as they recognized the torment they themselves had endured. The collective memory of Plaszow and Göth's atrocities has been preserved not only through survivor testimonies, but also through photographs, archival documents, and the powerful medium of cinema, black and white images from the camp, showing skeletal figures waiting for roll call or bodies piled near mass graves, serve as stark historical records. When these visuals are woven into compelling narratives, whether in books, museum exhibitions, or on film, they connect contemporary viewers to the visceral reality of genocide in a way that facts and figures alone cannot achieve. By merging historical documentation with artistic storytelling, Schindler's List expanded public awareness of the Holocaust's human scale. Viewers around the globe, many of whom had never studied detailed accounts of Plaszow, came to understand the everyday horrors of life under Göth's command. The film's scenes of the villa balcony sniper, the murderous party brightened by music, and the children caught in the sweep of violence created an immersive experience that transcended historical textbooks. In the wake of its release, educators reported that students were more engaged and emotionally invested in learning about genocide when shown these dramatized, yet historically grounded, depictions. Moreover, the film sparked renewed interest in Holocaust remembrance and education. Memorial sites, including the ground where Plaszow once stood, saw increased visitation as people sought to pay respects and gain deeper understanding. Museums supplemented their displays with clips from the film, using them to prompt discussions about moral responsibility and the dangers of indifference. Survivor-led panels often reference Schindler's List as a valuable tool for conveying their experiences to younger generations. Today, the story of Amon Göth remains a sobering cautionary tale about the capacity for ordinary individuals to commit extraordinary evil when empowered by ideology and bureaucracy. His depiction in cinema ensures that his cruelty continues to serve as a warning as long as those images flicker on screens and those testimonies resonate. Future generations are reminded that vigilance against hatred and intolerance is not optional. Through the combined force of archival evidence and artistic interpretation, Göth's legacy endures as both a monument to mankind's darkest capabilities and a beacon urging compassion, justice, and resistance in the face of oppression. Beyond its cinematic portrayal, Amon Göth's story has been meticulously documented in scholarly research, history books, and museum exhibitions that preserve the memory of Plaszow. In 1995, the Plaszow Museum inaugurated a permanent exhibition dedicated to the camp's history, situated on the very grounds where the cement factory once stood. The exhibition immerses visitors in the daily realities endured by prisoners. Detailed maps chart the layout of barracks, guard towers, and mass graves, while black and white photographs reveal the camp's desolation immediately after liberation. Each artifact on display has been carefully conserved to evoke the relentless horror of life under Göth's command. Bullet casings recovered from the grounds bear silent witness to the countless executions carried out from the villa balcony. Handwritten SS memoranda, yellowed with age, outline work assignments that masked forced labor's deadly toll. Torn prison uniforms, patched with crude stitching, speak of the cold winters and rampant disease that compounded the cruelty of starvation and beatings. Visitors walking among these relics can almost hear the echo of gunfire that once punctuated the camp's grim soundtrack. The museum's curators have arranged the space thematically, guiding guests through sections on arrest and deportation, daily routine and forced labor, acts of resistance, and finally, liberation and justice. Touchscreen kiosks allow younger audiences to access survivor testimonies, read translated excerpts from diaries, and view archival footage, all framed by scholarly commentary that connects individual experiences to broader historical contexts. Interactive panels encourage reflection on moral responsibility, asking visitors, "How would you have responded if faced with such orders?" School groups frequently visit the exhibit as part of history curricula. Many young people report being profoundly moved by standing on the very concrete slabs where prisoners once trembled with fear. They speak of imagining the furtive glances exchanged in roll calls, the hush that fell before each scheduled execution, and the desperate prayers offered in the darkness of overcrowded barracks. Educators note that these visceral encounters with authentic artifacts foster empathy and a deeper understanding of genocide's human toll lessons that diagrams and dates alone cannot impart. In addition to the museum, numerous academic publications delve into Göth's role at Płaszów, analyzing his psychological profile, command structure, and the systemic nature of Nazi violence. Conferences held at universities across Europe bring together historians, sociologists, and legal scholars to discuss the implications of command responsibility and the evolution of international human rights law. These efforts ensure that the narrative of Płaszów remains a vital component of Holocaust studies through exhibitions, research, and pedagogy. The story of Amon Göth endures as both a memorial to suffering and a warning. By confronting the brutal artifacts and testimonies he left behind, each generation is challenged to recognize the fragility of civilization and to uphold the principles of justice and human dignity, even when they must stand against the darkest chapters of history. One of the least expected chapters in the Amon Göth saga unfolded through the life of his own granddaughter. Jennifer Teege was born in Germany in 1970 to a Nigerian father and a German mother, completely unaware of the monstrous legacy carried in her blood. Growing up, she identified strongly with her African heritage, never suspecting that her maternal grandfather had been one of history's most notorious war criminals. It was only in 2010, during an attempt to trace her family history, that Teege stumbled upon a photograph of Göth and realized the horrifying truth. Shocked and disoriented, she embarked on a journey of discovery that culminated in her memoir, "My Grandfather Would Have Shot Me." In its pages, Teege lays bare the emotional turmoil of reconciling pride in her mixed-race identity with the shame of being descended from a man capable of unspeakable atrocities. She writes of the guilt that surged through her when she learned how Göth had gunned down innocent people from his villa balcony, and the anger she felt toward a past that had been meticulously hidden from her. Teege's candid account resonated globally, sparking intense media interest and provoking a complicated public dialogue. Interviews and articles highlighted the psychological weight of inherited trauma and the challenge of forging one's identity in the shadow of familial evil. Many readers were drawn to her honesty about the conflict between love for her family and horror at her grandfather's crimes. Teege did not seek to excuse or diminish Göth's actions. Rather, she used her unique position to confront the nature of inherited responsibility. Her story raised critical questions about collective memory and individual accountability. Should descendants be held morally accountable for their ancestors' deeds? How can one honor the victims of the Holocaust while also acknowledging personal ties to the perpetrators? Teege argued that understanding and acknowledging the truth, no matter how painful, is essential to preventing such horrors from recurring. She became an outspoken advocate for education about the Holocaust and for open discussion of difficult family legacies. Academic circles took notice as well. Conferences on intergenerational trauma invited Tej to speak about her experiences, and her memoir became a case study in courses on memory studies and ethics. Psychologists examined the impact of learning about a relative's crimes, noting that Tej's journey mirrored broader processes of grappling with inherited guilt and stigma. Her narrative has been cited in discussions of how societies remember collective atrocities and the role of personal storytelling in healing. Ultimately, Jennifer Tej's encounter with her family's dark past added a profound layer to the legacy of Amon Göth. Her voice transformed a historical account of cruelty into a living conversation about identity, memory, and moral responsibility. By daring to say, "My grandfather would have shot me," she ensured that Göth's story continued not only as a warning of human evil, but also as a testament to the resilience of truth and the enduring power of reckoning with history. The imperative to remember and educate about Amon Göth extends far beyond recounting a single individual's crimes. It forces us to confront the darker capabilities within civilized society. How can a nation, and, by extension, any community, produce and protect a mass murderer? Plaszow offers a stark case study, an industrial facility repurposed into a center of atrocity, sanctioned by legal structures and social indifference. The lessons derived from that camp underscore not only the imperative to avoid repeating historical errors, but also serve as a warning that genocide can emerge whenever power goes unchecked and persuasive rhetoric morphs into dogmatic indoctrination. At its core, the Göth narrative compels us to examine the mechanics of evil, the bureaucratic procedures that facilitate dehumanization, the propaganda that fuels hatred, and the incremental steps by which ordinary citizens become complicit in Płaszów, every administrative order, be it the scheduling of executions or the allocation of resources for forced labor, was a cog in a machine of systematic violence. The camp's existence depends on the willingness of individuals to obey orders without reflection, to accept cruelty as normal, and to surrender empathy in favor of obedience. Educational initiatives that incorporate Göth's story must emphasize personal agency in the face of oppression. Students and citizens alike should be encouraged to ask difficult questions. What would I do if ordered to devalue another human life? How can I resist the groupthink that silences dissent by engaging with survivor testimonies, archival documents, and the moral dilemmas faced by historical actors? Learners develop a more nuanced understanding of the conditions that enable genocide. This approach frames history not as a distant spectacle, but as a living guide for ethical decision-making. Furthermore, the Göth example illustrates the necessity of maintaining robust checks on authority. Democratic systems rely on transparency, dissent, and the rule of law precisely to guard against the rise of unaccountable power. Civic education should therefore stress the importance of free press, judicial independence, and civil society organizations in exposing abuse before it escalates. By studying how Płaszów operated, shielded by secrecy and ideology, learners appreciate why institutions must remain open to scrutiny. Ultimately, the legacy of Amon Göth is not confined to memorials or academic texts. It is alive in the ongoing challenge to protect human dignity and life, whether through formal curricula, museum exhibits, or public discourse. The constant reminder of what transpired at Płaszów calls us to vigilance. Commemorating the victims and understanding the perpetrators are two sides of the same coin, honoring memory and reinforcing our collective responsibility to oppose injustice. In doing so, We safeguard the fundamental principle that every person, regardless of background or circumstance, possesses an inviolable right to live free from terror and oppression. The moment the SS lieutenant fell through the trapdoor into the noose did not silence the anguished cries of the millions he had terrorized. Amon Göth's life and the Płaszów concentration camp stand as stark symbols of genocide's horrors and the tragedy that unfolds when humanity's moral compass is abandoned. Yet it is precisely by retelling this story through film, literature, museum exhibitions, and the first-hand accounts of survivors that we gain our best hope of preventing such darkness from ever descending again. Reenactments in movies like Schindler's List thrust Goth's crimes into the public imagination, ensuring that new generations understand the human cost of unchecked hatred. Historical studies and memoirs delve deeper, providing context and nuance that speak to the systematic nature of Nazi brutality. Museum exhibits, complete with artifacts and immersive displays, create spaces where visitors can confront the tangible remnants of atrocity bullet casings, prison uniforms, and the charred remains of makeshift crematoria. Survivor testimonies, whether recorded on video or shared in person, imbue these exhibits with living memory, reminding us that the victims were real people with names, families, and dreams. This process of remembrance is not intended to foster vengeance or perpetuate collective guilt. Rather, it cultivates empathy by humanizing the victims and encouraging us to see ourselves in their place. When we learn of Göth's hunting dogs tearing at emaciated bodies, or of the random cruelty inflicted from a villa balcony, we are confronted with the depths of human cruelty. But when we hear survivors recount how they supported one another, shared meager rations, or quietly resisted in small acts of solidarity, we glimpse the resilience of the human spirit. Keeping these narratives alive also sharpens our vigilance against the earliest warning signs of oppression. Educational programs that incorporate Płaszow's history prompt students to recognize the mechanisms of dehumanization propaganda, scapegoating, and the erosion of civil rights. They learn that silence in the face of injustice is complicity, and that even small acts of courage can interrupt a slide into mass violence. Ultimately, the story of Amon Göth and Płaszów is a call to action. It reminds us that remembrance is not passive. It demands a commitment to building a fairer, more compassionate society. By honoring the memory of those who suffered, we reaffirm our shared responsibility to protect human dignity. In doing so, we ensure that the lessons of Płaszów illuminate our path forward, guiding us toward a world where every individual is valued, and where the shadow of genocide can never again darken the horizon. The video about Amon Göth and the atrocities at the Płaszów concentration camp does more than reconstruct a dark chapter in human history. It delivers profound values and messages to its audience. First, it helps us grasp the depths of fascist brutality when power is placed above conscience. Humans can become the most savage of predators. The image of the SS lieutenant slaughtering prisoners from his villa balcony, training hunting dogs to attack the innocent, and orchestrating public hangings are not merely dry historical events, but stark reminders that genocide does not arise from a few evil individuals alone, but from a political and social system that allows, indeed, encourages barbaric behavior. Second, the video underscores the importance of justice and individual responsibility. The process of capturing, trying, and executing Göth demonstrates that no perpetrator of mass murder can escape the consequences of his crimes. By presenting irrefutable evidence from survivor testimonies to SS personnel files and photographs of the camp after liberation, the film highlights the role of the rule of law in restoring righteousness. Even when the execution process contains emotionally wrenching and technically flawed moments, such as the first 2 failed hanging attempts, justice is not always swift or simple. But ultimately, truth and accountability prevail. Third, the video conveys lessons in self-discipline and vigilance. Watching the merciless scenes at Płaszów prompts viewers to ask themselves, would I have the courage to speak out when witnessing injustice? Would I have the moral strength to avoid inadvertently enabling inhuman actions? Analyses of how the Plaszow Nazi regime consolidated power, exploited propaganda, and silenced dissent offer vital lessons for individuals today only when every member of society upholds principles, defends freedom, and follows conscience. Can similar darkness be prevented from spreading? Finally, the video imparts a message of compassion and hope. Although Amon Göth's story is tragic, it is precisely because of those who dared to tell the truth, filmmakers, authors, researchers, and survivors sharing their memories, that we keep alive the hope that humanity can learn from its past. Bearing witness to others' suffering awakens empathy within us and compels us to act for justice and human rights. This is the core value the video seeks to convey, although the past cannot be changed. Through remembrance, education, and compassion, we can build a fairer, more tolerant world, one resilient enough to withstand any threat to our shared humanity.